Today, we will be looking at all of the different ways that you can use service projects in your console. Of course, we'll begin with some definitions, and then we'll move into some examples of different ways that service projects can be used, and what types of opportunities benefit from this type of opportunity. From there, we'll walk through the methods that service projects can be used to record activity and how volunteers interact with them. Then we'll look at a few unique aspects of service projects which can allow you to expand your usage of them, like scheduling and also just the application process that they carry. So let's start off by defining some terms as we're kind of approaching this topic. In service, the term opportunity is really kind of an umbrella term. Any way that you would record activity or have volunteers schedule activity with you is going to fall under what we call opportunities. When you click into add a new opportunity, you'll see three different types of opportunities available. We have what we call normal events, time slot events, and service projects. In brief, the event types allow you to define shift-based work. So if we look down here, you can see there's a start date and time and an end date and time for this normal event. Essentially, this just has one shift. So you're creating a time for volunteers to arrive, a time for them to leave generally. And of course, there can be some variance there, and that can always get adjusted and recorded later. But you're creating a shift. A time slot event is kind of an expansion on that idea where you might have multiple shifts within the same event, perhaps the same thing over and over again, multiple times throughout the week or every single day. Or maybe there's a bunch of things happening at one time and you need volunteers to pick which job they're interested in or what role they'd like to take. So again, events are defining shifts. You're telling volunteers, I need X number of volunteers at this date and time, and volunteers can then sign up from there. Service projects are a little different than that. They don't have a specific time frame. You're not defining a shift that volunteers are registering for. Instead, there's a date range during which the project is considered active. While a service project is active, volunteers can record hours into that project. Now, how they record hours is dictated by a setting here called log service project hours. We're going to dig into this a little bit more later. But the idea is you have an open project, which may or may not have a strict date range. Let's say, for example, you're doing something like an internship for a particular season, or maybe you have a mentoring program or a coaching program that operates within a certain time frame or a certain date range. Well, then you'd want those dates to be reflected in here. You can tell the system, the start date and the end date of this project, and during this time frame, volunteers can record activity. Or perhaps you have a project where there isn't really a defined time frame. This is just always ongoing. You might use volunteers who work in your office, and this is just always happening. Or perhaps you do things like trail maintenance or park maintenance or ground maintenance. You might have volunteers who are kind of just operating independently and then reporting back to you those hours. In those kinds of time frames or those kinds of projects, you don't necessarily need a date range to be reflected to your volunteers. So you can tell the system to push this date range back as far as you'd like to. And then you can also, under the advanced options, tell service not to display those dates. In this case, the system will display this project as an ongoing opportunity. Volunteers won't see any time frames associated with this or date ranges associated with it. So service projects are more like long-form activities where volunteers simply record their hours as they serve. So a few examples, we kind of already mentioned the idea of something like a mentorship program or a coaching program where volunteers are kind of operating independently and then just reporting back to you those hours. Another example of that might be, if you hire a volunteer to do something like marketing work and they're working from home and they just want to record their hours as they serve. Other kind of common uses for service projects would be things like recording board member hours or committee hours, where those volunteers are just kind of operating on their own again and reporting back to you those activities. But you can also use service projects for things that are just a little bit more free form, maybe kind of like pop-in opportunities. Something like dog walking, or maybe you have a project that's always going on like sorting or filing or anything that might constitute like on-site or day of service where volunteers don't need to register ahead of time. Maybe they can just pop in and record their hours as they serve. Going back to the idea of an event, just to be very clear, if you have anything that is a little bit more pop-in, but you need volunteers to still schedule ahead of time, or there are set time frames during which they should be operating, generally that should fall under more of an event, like a normal event or a time slot event. But if it's something where volunteers can just record their hours as they serve, or perhaps you're recording hours on behalf of a volunteer, that's when a service project can be more useful. So one of the hallmarks of the process of using a service project is that it does have an application process by default. So if we back up here and look at my volunteer perspective, this is my event listing page. I have a project in here right now called Reading Mentors, and this is going on for a particular time frame. And if a volunteer is interested in this, they can click on the name of the project here. They can read more about it. And then down at the bottom, it says apply to participate. A volunteer isn't directly registering for this. Instead, they're applying to be a part of this project. And then someone on staff will either approve or reject that volunteer based on whether or not they meet the particular criteria that we have in place. Now, you can actually still have restrictions on a project. So perhaps to even be considered for this project, someone has to have already attended one of our orientations, or perhaps they've already had to have had a background check completed. You could have those stipulations in place, or maybe there's an age restriction. So you can still set restrictions on projects as people are applying. But generally, when someone is interested in this, they apply to participate. That will have them either create a new account or log into an existing account, just like any other opportunity would do. In this case, I was logged in previously as an admin, so it's remembering me and asking for my password. But normally, if this was a new volunteer, for example, they would be brought to an account check page, and that'll just ask for their email address and first name. If this person had worked with you recently, if this was a volunteer who works with you on a regular basis and this is their home computer, it would skip this whole process and it would just log them in directly. But if someone's new, they type in their information here. If the system recognizes their data, it'll have them log in. If it doesn't recognize their data, it'll have them create a new profile as a part of the registration process, right? But if they already have an account, or once they've already created a profile, then they can kind of proceed with the login or with the registration process. Now, in this particular project, when someone applies to be a part of my Reading Mentors program, they can always add notes as a part of their application. But I do also have some custom registration questions kind of being employed in this case as well. So this particular project needs some extra information from my volunteers as they apply. So when someone is interested in this, they would give me their reference name. So they would put that person's name here. They give me a reference phone number. And then from there, they would give me their current employer's name and then their highest level of education. This one's not required, although it could be. These are all custom registration questions that I've created in my system. So you can do really kind of whatever you want to here, but essentially these are questions that aren't normally presented to volunteers, but I would like to ask this data when someone applies to be a part of this project. So if we put some information in here, I can then go ahead and fill this out, click on continue, I'll get a notification here, and then this person gets put into a bucket on the back end. So if we back over to the admin side, you can see under opportunity management, there's a menu here that says Review Open Service Project Applications. So when someone has applied for a service project, they wind up in here. Now, depending on your access level, you could limit someone's scope so that someone only sees like their particular project. Of course, as an admin, you're going to see everything here. But I could also go directly into my opportunities, and I could go straight to that particular project if I only want to look at the applications for that specific project. But when we're looking at this menu, whether it's all of my projects at once or just this one particular project in this case, I can see who applied, when they applied, what they applied for, and then on the right-hand side, we get their application notes and all the answers to those custom registration questions. So I could use this data as a part of my vetting process. Of course, in this case, I would obviously be calling like a reference here. But then I can use that information to help me understand if I need to approve or reject this person. From here, I can also view all their profile details if I need to see more information about this person. And then, of course, if I want to email or call that person, all that data is kind of right at hand. From there, once I've made a decision, I can select this application and then either approve or disapprove the application. This does not automatically carry with it a notification. You'll see there's a menu item here that says send automatic volunteer notification email, and this can be yes or no. This is just like an automatic approval or disapproval message. And this email is customized in the system configuration. There's a section called email message content. So if you want to play around with the data in that email or how it's formatted or how it's worded, that's all done through there. But if I want to have this person get a confirmation email right away, I can select yes, click on approve application, and then that will add this person into that project. So this is, again, slightly different workflow than most of your events. Now you can actually choose to have events carry an application process like that. It's referred to slightly differently, but just to point this out, when we're creating a normal event or a time slot event, under the advanced options, you can tell the system to require approval of volunteer self-registrations. And this will essentially make every registration pending until you've gone through and approved or rejected those volunteer applications. Okay, so that application process that I just mentioned for service projects is good for a couple reasons. Obviously, if you want to vet every single registration, that's great. There's a stopgap in place. If someone's interested in a project, they apply for it, and then you get to go through and approve or reject whomever you'd like to. But that also means that you can just use service projects as kind of a format for receiving different types of applications without even necessarily intending to have volunteers record hours in those projects. What I mean by that is generally Service has one volunteer application. People are filling out one general application when they create a profile, but perhaps you have different programs where volunteers have to apply first, and then once they've applied and they've answered some special questions relating to that program, then you might give them permission to sign up for events that fall under that program, right? You might still need to have shift-based work, but you want people to apply to be a part of that program first, and then once they've been vetted and approved, then they can start recording hours. Well, you can use service projects essentially to act as buckets or applications for those programs. So you could set up a service project with just kind of a more generic title, like new volunteer application, for whatever program, right? So call it new volunteer application, and then maybe have the program name, something like that. Give a description of how they're having to apply for this initially. You have to do some vetting, or they have to attend a training, or whatever the process may be. And then you just use this to receive applications. You do not need to allow volunteers to record hours into a service project. We're going to get into this in a little bit here. This is obviously a very useful part of service projects, is allowing volunteers to record activity. But you could just use a service project to receive general applications. And you could use custom registration questions to bolster that project or that application so that people are giving you additional information that they don't normally give you when they're creating a profile through the general application. So the way we would accomplish that, just to round this out, again, create a service project that's kind of a new volunteer application. I would push this end date back pretty far. It's up to you, obviously, but the whole purpose of this is then you can just leave this as ongoing, which means we would then also set this display service project dates to no. I don't want volunteers to see this date or those date ranges. This is just an ongoing project. We would leave log service project hours to admin only. Volunteers aren't recording hours here. I'm just using this to receive applications. And then you can also tell the system whether or not to automatically approve all applications. It's up to you kind of what workflow you want to use here. Do you want people to have a stopgap and then be approved, or do you want them to just kind of land in this bucket? The example that I showed would not automatically approve applications because I want to vet people, as they're applying for this program. And then in that case, we can publish this opportunity and volunteers can apply for this all day long. No one's recording hours into it. It's just a way to receive a kind of longer form application. So obviously the other really big portion of that is, how do we add those extra questions in? How do I make this a longer form application? And that's done using what we call custom registration questions. If we go into opportunity management, if I go into search and manage existing opportunities, every opportunity in your database has the option to add or manage custom registration questions. So if we look at this Reading Mentors program that I created previously, and I click on this Manage Custom Registration Questions, I can see the full inventory of questions I've created previously. Your inventory might be blank if you've never created a question like this. So to create a new question, whether or not this is blank, on the bottom right, you can click on Manage Registration Question Inventory. And then from here, you can generate those questions. You define what type of question is this, whether it's required or optional, if it's active or archived, the text of the question, if it's a drop-down menu. So in my example, I had this highest level of education. I have specific answers that I'm looking for there. So you can list those answers out with commas in between the options, and that's what creates new line items. These can also have required answers. So perhaps for this event, someone has to select a particular option. Maybe this event requires that someone is a Spanish speaker. I could make that a required answer. And if someone does not select yes, I would say, thanks for your interest, but you must be able to speak Spanish to be able to participate in this, right? And I can give them like other instructions as a failure message. So this is where we create those questions. And then if we back up again, every opportunity has this option to manage custom registration questions. And this is where you select which ones are enabled. And then you can also change the order of the questions if you want to move those around. Okay, so this is all the idea of bolstering the application process for a particular service project, whether or not volunteers are recording hours into this project, or if it's just a way for you to receive people within this project, new applicants who are interested in this particular program. Okay, but again, one of the primary purposes of service projects is that volunteers can then record hours, or you can record hours. You obviously don't have to use them to do that, but that is one of the main functions that they provide. So if we look at this Reading Mentors program, and I go into update this project, you can see for this particular project, I've set this log service project hours to both. There are 4 options in here. Admin only is the default. That means volunteers are never recording hours into this project, but you can record hours on behalf of volunteers. So if they tell you their activity and you just want to record it manually, you can always do that. The other 3 options would give volunteers permission to record hours into this project. So online, on-site, and both are the options here. Online, you can think of this like retroactively recording hours. A volunteer can log into their account. There's a section for them to record activity. You can also send direct links for this. But there's a section for them to record activity, and then they can retroactively record those hours. So they could say, I was here yesterday for 3.5 hours. Here's what I did. And they could record that themselves. And they could do that anytime in the past up to the start date of this project. So they can log hours retroactively. They cannot forecast hours using that option. On-site would let volunteers record hours kind of in situ, so as they are serving. When they arrive for a shift, they sign in. When they leave, they sign out, and that records exactly how long they were there for that particular instance. This can be done using the standalone sign-in console. So you might have like a tablet set up or a laptop set up. When volunteers arrive, they sign in. When they leave, they sign out. That records their hours. Or perhaps you're using mobile sign-in. So volunteers would be sent a link to sign in on their own phone. You could also post a QR code that volunteers scan when they arrive, and that would send them to the page to sign in for their shift. But essentially, they have to track their hours as they serve them. So they sign in when they get there, sign out when they leave. The system records exactly how long they were there. If you are using on-site hours like this or tracking hours in this manner, of course, there's an instance where volunteers forget to or neglect to sign out. So you can set a default for this project. If we scroll down to the advanced options again, the last item in here is the default kiosk credit hours. So if someone signs in for this shift or for this project, and they neglect to sign out, then they will receive, in this case, what my system default is. This is in the system configuration. So you can have like a system-wide setting for this, but maybe this project is a little bit unique and people normally work for 2.5 hours and that's not what my system default is. I could put that in here for this particular project. And then if someone forgets to sign out from this project, they'll get 2.5 hours. Okay. The third option here is both. The third option that affects volunteers, and that of course just enables both of those options for volunteers. Now let's actually take a look at how these hours are recorded. It's fine enough to talk about this, but of course it's a lot better to look at it. So if we switch to the volunteer perspective, I'm going to use my profile because I am a part of this project now. So if I go to view the system as a volunteer, under the registration management section, I can record or update service project activity. So in here, I can select the project, I can choose what date I came in, and then from there I can input how many hours I served. Right? I could add notes as well, and then I can record the activity. This could also be connected to impact tracking, so it could trigger impact tracking at the same time. If you're not totally sure what that is, it's basically just a way to record additional numerical metrics. In this example, like reading mentors, maybe I want to record how many chapters we read or how many pages we read or how many vocab words we learned. There we have an entire webinar on what impact tracking is and how to utilize that. So if you're interested in that, you can learn more. But right here, I'm recording hours for this service project. What the system says is online or kind of retroactive. So I click on record, those hours get kind of locked in for that project, and I can see those instances recorded here. So this is one way, again, volunteers can record activity. That would be online. The on-site option, again, would use the sign-in console. So we're not going to go through the entirety of the sign-in console today. We also have a webinar on that subject. But if you have the sign-in console opened on a device, a volunteer would just basically check in when they get there and check out when they leave, or they could use their phone to do those same sorts of actions. So that's kind of the volunteer perspective. It's really pretty straightforward for them in terms of how they can record hours. And then from your end, on the admin side, if we go into search and manage opportunities here, I can go down to that project. I can go to record or log activity directly. And then from here, I can see all of the recorded activity. This is sorted by volunteer name initially. You could sort this by the date or the number of hours if you prefer. But each of these entries is something that you have control over. You can go and edit these no matter who input the information. So if I wanted to go and correct this, maybe it wasn't 2.5 hours, it was actually an hour 15 minutes. I could record that or modify that directly just by clicking on this adjust option here to adjust the hours. You can also, incidentally, do this directly through a volunteer's profile. If we go into someone's account, you can go to add or view their service project hours, and you can see that recorded in here, just like you can with events. So you can go through and record or adjust hours for events as well. Okay, but obviously modifying hours is useful if you need to make changes, but you can also remove that activity from the admin side. If I go into log activity here, I can select a particular entry. Maybe it was recorded in error. And then down at the bottom, I can also choose to remove that entry. And of course, that just deletes it. You can also on the admin side record activity. And this is a very similar fashion to how volunteers record activity. You select the person here. Again, I'm in the project itself. I could also go through the volunteer's profile and record hours to a particular project. It just kind of depends on what your goal is. Are you trying to record hours for a bunch of people in the same project? Or are you trying to record hours for a singular person across multiple projects? That would change kind of where you would go in the system. But I can choose the person here. I can choose the date they came in, how many hours they served, add some notes, and log the activity. It's the exact same function that the volunteers get. You're just doing this from the admin side. So this is how hours are recorded. And as far as reporting goes, these are each recorded as a separate registration or time served. And then, of course, the hours get added to your reports as well. And you'll see those show up in any reports that include this person and this project. All right, so that's recording activity. And there's a couple other things that I want to mention about service projects that can be very helpful. Let's say with this Reading Mentors program, I have a regular schedule for a volunteer. This person comes in every Tuesday from noon to 2, And I just want to kind of forecast that so I can prepare for it and I can be ready for it on my end. Now that sounds a little bit like a time slot event where, it's a particular shift every Tuesday from noon to 2. But if it's more relationally based, maybe I only care really that this person is doing that. I'm not trying to open up a shift for anyone else to sign up for. If I just want to know that this person is planning on doing that, and if they're not going to be there, I'm not trying to fill that void. I'm just trying to forecast my relationship with that person or what they're planning on doing so that I can have it on my calendar and my staff can be prepared for who is generally coming in and when. In those scenarios, you can use something called service project schedules. So if we click into this project, in the second block of options here, there's an option to manage service project schedules. And if we click into this item, from here I can select a person and I can create sort of that schedule or that forecast. So I could say, this person's usually in on Tuesdays and they're here from noon to 2. So I can build out kind of an example shift. I can add notes in here if I want to, and I can create an entry. These entries, again, are not time slots. No one else can see this. This is really only on the back end or for this person to see. So they can see kind of their forecasted schedule as well. But something I can do is I can come in here and say, okay, let's repeat this, just like we might repeat a time slot. So to the left-hand side, I can click on Repeat Schedule Entry. I can say, okay, every Tuesday on a weekly basis, we already have one for this week, so let's start on the 22nd, and let's say they're planning to do this through the end of May. So I can choose my kind of end date there, click on Create Repeating Schedule, and then essentially that will build out a copy of that entry on every Tuesday, in this case, from noon to 2. So now I get a list view version of this. On the right-hand side, I can see the scheduled activity, although this has no bearing on my reports until those hours actually get recorded. Now you can actually see the entry for yesterday was recorded. We get this icon here saying activity was logged on this Tuesday. So we see this icon saying that did actually happen. And you can actually log these hours through here if you need to. On the admin side, if you just want to say this person was here, you could log those hours and it would give them, in this case, 2 hours because that's the length of the shift. You cannot forecast this, so this date is in the future. If I click on log hours, it's going to say, hey, you can't do that. This has not yet happened. But if someone has recorded hours on this date, whether or not it was exactly this time frame or this many hours, you'll get a notification or an icon here telling you that those hours were recorded or activity was logged on that date. So again, this is a list view, which can be helpful if you just want to view kind of everything built out. But if you have, 15 different people working 15 different shifts, this can get very arduous or a pretty long list. So if we back up to the opportunity dashboard, we can open up the calendar view, and the calendar view can actually show us those scheduled entries. So we can see the one that we just created here on every Tuesday from noon to 2. It tells you the person, it tells you the project that they're a part of, and it just gives you a way to kind of see that on your calendar. And then if you want to, you can, of course, print out this calendar. I can click on Print Calendar. I could choose to print the entire month, or maybe I only want to do 1 week at a time, and then I can print that out. One quick note about this calendar displays exactly what your list view displays when you're looking at your opportunities. So if I only wanted to view that Reading Mentors program, I could search specifically for that program. And then if I open up the calendar, now that's all I'm going to see on this calendar. I'm not going to see everything else in the system. All right, one last thing about these scheduled service projects, or the service project schedules rather, is that when you create a service project like this, you can define automatic reminder emails. These automatic reminder emails go out based on service project schedule. So if I have this set to 1 day prior, for that entry that we just created, that volunteer is going to receive an email every Monday now that they're scheduled to work on Tuesday. So it functions exactly the same as reminder emails work for time slot events, except of course it's based on service project schedules, which is very much one-to-one. It's much more relationally based rather than shift-based. All right. Well, that is kind of a general overview of service projects, how they're defined, and different ways that you can employ them. Again, the general use case for a project is if you have volunteers who are operating with you kind of on their own terms, or perhaps within some bounds that you've set, but you need them to record their own hours rather than sign up for particular shifts. That's sort of the general use case for service projects. But there is that case also for creating more kind of specific applications for particular programs, using those custom registration questions and letting volunteers apply to participate in something and then giving you a place to receive those applications. So of course, as you have questions on this subject, please feel free to engage with our customer support team. Whenever you're logged in as an admin, you can always use the Need Help button here to ask a question. Let's say you want to learn more about service projects themselves. You could search for that term, see the articles that have to do with that. If you click into any of these, you can obviously review that directly within here, but you can also choose to pop it open if you'd rather have a separate page to review that. So there's a lot of good information here. And then I do also want to reiterate that all of our previously recorded webinars are available if you go to video.servicetech.com. Or you can just go to YouTube and search for Service Technologies. But all of our previously recorded webinars are available here. We have a lot of playlists that are created on particular topics. The majority of this content is intended for admin, but there are also some that are available for volunteers that you are free to send out to your volunteers. They're just kind of general aids on how to do particular things. So I want to thank you so much for joining today. I know this is a very deep subject, so if you do have specific questions, please feel free to ask those. But we're going to go ahead and wind it down here for today. So thanks again so much for your time. And as you have questions as you're moving through the system, please feel free to ask away. We're grateful to be partnered with you all, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.